Hi, and welcome to the Claws Club. Today on Crafts with Claws, we have something really special. Today, we're going to be building a drone, but not just any kind of drone. This is a Cinewhoop. And what's so cool about Cinewhoops is you can fly this anywhere. You can fly this indoors, outdoors, you can fly through trees, underneath bushes, any place you could possibly imagine. This is safe to fly. The fact that it's safe and that you have these prop guards also make it a great drone for a beginner. If you're just learning to fly, you can kind of run into things like trees and walls, that sort of thing, and you don't have to worry about crashing. So this is a great drone if you're just learning how to fly. After you get really good at flying, this drone will stay with you. You put a GoPro on it and you can get professional cinematic footage that will rival anything that's out there right now. So this is probably the coolest drone that you can buy on the market right now. And guess what? We're going to build it. Let's get started. So let's go over some of the tools that you're going to need. The most important thing that I recommend spending the money and getting something really good is a soldering iron. This is a Weller. It's adjustable. It lets me adjust the heat so I can turn it up really high when I'm doing like the thick battery pads and the thick wires for the battery pad. I can turn it down when I get into real small components that I don't want to like have to worry about burning the pad off. So the other real important thing is flux. I prefer a paste flux because it's less messy than the liquid flux. The liquid flux tends to kind of run all over everything. So you're going to need some decent quality solder. Some people like to use a flux core that has the flux inside. I prefer just using regular solder with and then using flux on the side. I like using small little wooden skewers for dabbing the flux. It makes it real easy to just go in and put it exactly where you need it. I always have some alcohol. I also have a wire holder. I always have lots of 4-inch cable ties, just good old-fashioned black cable ties. I also will have some heat shrink tubing. I like getting an assortment, something like this. I really recommend getting yourself a whole set, a small set of metric Allen wrenches, some wire cutters. I use these for the bigger wires and it just makes the job so clean and a lot easier. I always have a pair of scissors. This comes in handy, so when you do need to, if you do need to use some double-sided tape, you got to cut it some way, so I always have some scissors handy. I really recommend getting yourself a good pair of wire cutters, the real small ones. You also need a pair of small needle nose pliers. An X-Acto blade comes in handy. I use Loctite blue 242 thread locker for all my builds. So this is everything that you'll need for the upgraded version. We'll be running a DJI FPV unit. We'll be using an iFlight Success F7 controller. We'll be running the iFlight Success 35 amp mini ESC. This is a 4-in-1 ESC. We'll be adding a 470 microfarad 50 volt capacitor to the power lead. We'll also be using an XT60 connector so we can run a little bit bigger batteries. I'll be adding an LED array along with a really strong beeper, so if we lose our drone in the bushes or something, we'll be able to find it both by sight and by hearing it. This build will also have the Brotherhobby 2204 1950 kV motors. So these are really smooth and they just make for the best cinematic video you could possibly ever want. So the frame we'll be using is the HGLRC Sector 150. This is a prop guard type frame. These prop guards are virtually indestructible, and even if you did break them, they're only $5 for a whole set. So and if I've yet to break one, and I've had some pretty bad crashes. What's nice about prop guards versus ducks is they're a lot quieter, and the performance is more like a regular quad without ducks or any kind of prop guards. It's actually pretty good. So I highly recommend this frame for a Cinewhoop. This is so far my go-to for all my Cinewhoops. Okay, the first thing we do to get started is we're going to pair the ESC for soldering, and we're going to mount the battery on that. So what we're going to do first is just to put a little bit of flux, the paste flux, on each of these leads, and don't go too crazy. Just put just enough to allow the solder to flow. And next, what we're going to do is we're just going to go through and tin each of these leads. If you look close, you can see just nice and smooth and shiny. So these are, each one of these are the motor leads. So we'll do the same to the other side. And we'll tin upside. So this is the side that the battery leads will be connected to. There we go. So what I'm going to do is put this back into my holder, like so. So this is the capacitor that we're going to be using. This is a 50 volt 470 microfarad capacitor. And so then what you do is we just take this street tubing and we just put those leads on. You should have a little tiny bit of the tip, just like so. Now I have that tip's bent up just a little bit. I'll stick those into the flux. Put just a little solder right there on each tip. Then what I do is get them spaced correctly. And we're just going to come in here and double check, make sure that you have your negative sign is for your black. So we'll just get that lined up perfect. Okay, so once that is on, it should look something like this. So we have our capacitor is soldered to the top. Our jack that connects to the controllers down here on the bottom. Our battery connector is coming out the back of this. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to install these standoffs. I prefer just standard little plastic standoffs for the ESC. So once we have the 4 standoffs in place, it should look something like that. And I'm going to just tighten these down just a little tiny bit. You don't have to go very tight. Just tighten enough so that they don't come off. When you're all finished, you should have something like this. Little tiny bit of flexibility in the ESC. You don't have to have the same kind of an isolation like you do with the controller. So the next step is to attach the motors temporarily, just so we can figure out how long the wires need to be. So I am going to just use one screw to hold it in place. Once you have all the motors in place, what you're going to want to do is run your wires for each motor, and so that they line up with the ESCs. So what you do is you'll take your wires and you'll just run them around. Like, I like running my wires through the inside, and so that you don't have wires sticking out. And so what you do is you line everything up just perfect. And then what you're going to want to do is take your needle nose and just clip them to exactly the right length. Once you have all the wires cut to the proper length, go ahead and strip off a small amount of the insulation and go ahead and tin each of the leads so it's nice and clean. So once you're all done tinning the leads, just go through and make sure that any of the ones that are a little bit too long, you just cut them off a little bit. You don't need very long leads. I like flying with my prop rotating out. So we're going to have the top right spinning clockwise, and we're going to have the top left spinning counterclockwise. And down here on the bottom, we're going to have the bottom left spinning clockwise, and we're going to have the bottom right spinning counterclockwise. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start with motor number 1 and work my way around. So motor number 1, we know we need to swap the motor wires. So what I'm going to do first is kind of get these other wires out of the way so they're not in my way. And so what I'll do is the first wire I'm going to connect is the outside all the way to the outside. So I take this outside wire, and I'm going to solder it to the very end pin on the outside. Okay. Now with this motor, we're going to be swapping the next 2 leads, and so what we're going to do is we're going to take, instead of the inside going to the inside pin, we're going to be taking the outside going to the middle. So take your outside lead from the motor, and you're going to solder that to the middle lead, which would be the second pin in. So there's 6 pins right here, 6 pads. So these 3 pads go to motor number 1, these 3 pads go to motor number 2. It's the same thing on the other side. So we have these 3 wires right here, these 3 pads will go to motor number 1. So I'm taking the outside wire from motor number 1 and I'm putting it to the center or the middle pad, the second pad in. So you can see how the wires all run off the ESC nice and clean towards the inside, and they're all lined up. And so we'll just leave this. We won't worry about getting these tidied up until the very end. So next step is to go ahead and do motor number 3 and motor number 4. So if everything's installed correctly, it should look pretty good. All of them should be shiny and kind of like little ball bearings. I've done better, but check your solder joints. Make sure and do a pull test to make sure that they're all on there really good. And that's a pretty clean lead right there. The way everything is running right here. We'll fix these wires here in a minute. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to take 4 cable ties, and we're just going to put it around the arms, just to kind of keep those motor wires in place, keep them lined up. So what I'll do is I'll go all the way towards the center of the frame as far as I can and make sure that the wires are lined up. And I tighten that and clip off the excess, so you can see how kind of keeping these motors in place. Now we're looking at have the motors, make sure everything's connected. What I'll do is I'll go through and I'll inspect closely and make sure that none of these there's no solder leads touching each other. And what I'll do is I'll take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol on a Q-tip, and then what I'll do is I'll just kind of clean these leads off right here, clean the flux that's left off. We don't want any of that flux to cause any kind of shorts, and it does have some conductive properties, so you don't have to be out of control, but you should. And that's why I try not to go too crazy with the flux to begin with, so you don't have too much to clean up later on. So once that's all nice and clean, all these solder joints should be nice and shiny, and hopefully they look a little bit better than this batch, but that's good. So the next step is we're going to start wiring up the controller. So with this, it's pretty simple. There's a plug for the DJI that just plugs right into here. So we just need to make sure that that lines up to the DJI plug, and then we have to install a BEC so that we could keep the voltage in line, so the DJI can handle, so we can run 6-cell batteries on this. To set up our wiring harness, what we're going to do is take the DJI plug, and what we need is, we'll be dealing with 4 wires. There's the yellow wire, which is going to be the S bus. There is the brown wire, which is the signal ground. We have the gray wire, which is the transmit. So the transmit of the DJI will connect to the receive of the controller. The white wire is the receiver, the receive side. So that will connect to the transmit side. So what I did is I took the cable that came with the iFlight controller, and I connected the receive to the transmit to the receive. I connected the yellow to the yellow of the S bus, and I connected the brown signal to the ground of the controller connector. I'm not using the power from the connector, so what I did is, since we're running 6-cell batteries, I'll be using a BEC, and what this does is this is a voltage regulator, and it takes the voltage of the battery down to 12 volts so that we don't damage the DJI unit. So what I did is I took the power input to the DJI and I connected it to the power output of the BEC. And then the BEC will get its power from the battery and the ground of the battery, which will connect to the controller right here. So you can see on the controller these 2 pins here on the very end. So this is towards the back of the controller, and you can, the last 2 pins are labeled battery and ground. We're going to connect the BEC to that, so we're getting voltage directly from the battery. So what I did is I just went in and just put a little bit of flux on there first, and now we'll go ahead and tin those pads. So now we have the power coming from the battery and the ground of the controller going through the BEC. That will power the DJI unit. Alright, so we're going to hook up the buzzer and the LEDs. So the way this works is the top wire is the red wire, that's our 5 volts. That'll connect to the 5 volts here. The LED is the yellow wire, that'll connect to the LED here. There's the buzzer negative, which connects to the buzzer negative here. And then there's the ground wire, which connects to here. So don't confuse the buzzer ground with the ground wire. So we'll go ahead and solder those on. And that's all there is to it. Alright, so that plugs in right there, and once we have that set up, then we have the plug that we have created that will just plug in right here into this slot. So we should have it pretty well clean. So you can take a piece of tape and hold the screws in place. makes it a little bit easier to put it together. Then when I turn it over, just put on our little half spacers on each one. Just like that. So we have the 4 screws being held in by tape with the 4 little spacers. And I have all the cables connected. So we're just going to put that in place. Okay, so now we have the controller mounted. It should still be a little bit flexible so that the vibration isn't transmitted through. So that looks pretty good. We're going to do it to BEC. I'm going to use a little piece of double-sided tape, 3M Scotch, and I just cut a small strip. And I'm going to put this on the flat side so it'll bond a little bit better. And I just put that double-sided tape right there. Right. And that is just going to go right here. Alright. So we're ready to install the DJI unit, the top plate, and all the small little details. We're getting close. Capacitor will just kind of be bent over and go just like this. So you can see where that just fits right there, and the wires kind of keep it from going down too far. And then next, we're going to put on the antenna holder. Those just slide on the posts, just like this. Okay, next you're going to grab a couple of cable ties. Take your cable ties and don't tighten them down, you just want to get them started. Run them through the slots and then back up around like this. When you're all done, it should look something like this. It's okay if it's angled a little bit, it's not going to hurt anything. You just don't want it to fall off. So we'll take our DJI unit and connect the cable in first. And then just a matter of attaching the antennas. You can feel them kind of pop when they go in. So once you get everything kind of straightened out, go ahead and slide the camera on the front. Just like that. And so next we're going to attach the motors. So I like to use blue Loctite. So we're just going to take our prop guards. We'll just remove the temporary screw that we have in there. You're going to take your longer screw and dip it in the Loctite, put it in place. And just snug them up. You don't want to go too tight or you'll strip them. Be real careful. And just wipe off any excess Loctite. And there we go. Just go ahead and we'll speed through these other ones real quick. Alright, once you have all the motors on, everything's tightened up, go ahead and clean it up with some alcohol. Wipe everything down. Make sure you always have your antennas on when you power up your DJI unit. You don't want to fry your transmitter. So the next step is to go in and into Betaflight and set up our controller. So I'll see you there in Betaflight here.